The desert heat shimmered like liquid mercury across the training grounds of Camp Pendleton, where Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez crouched behind a makeshift barrier, watching through her scope as another Marine missed his target. The sound of the rifle crack echoed across the range, followed by the inevitable curse word floating on the hot California air. It was the 7th consecutive miss that morning, and the frustration among the elite sniper unit was becoming as thick as the humidity. Maria had been observing this particular training exercise for 3 days now, taking mental notes of each shooter's technique, breathing patterns, and decision-making process under pressure. As the unit's newest addition and the only woman among 12 highly trained Marine snipers, she understood that every eye was on her, waiting for her to either prove herself worthy of the elite designation or fail spectacularly in front of everyone. The mission they were preparing for was unlike anything the unit had encountered before. Intelligence reports from Afghanistan indicated that a high-value terrorist cell had established operations in a mountainous region near the Pakistani border. The cell was responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces, and their elimination had become a top priority for military command. What made this mission particularly challenging was the terrain and the target's tactical sophistication. These weren't ordinary insurgents. They were highly trained operatives who understood surveillance, counter-sniper tactics, and had access to advanced equipment. Colonel James Morrison, the commanding officer overseeing the training, had handpicked each member of this unit based on their exceptional marksmanship records, psychological profiles, and ability to perform under extreme stress. Maria's inclusion in the team had raised eyebrows throughout the Marine Corps hierarchy. While women had proven themselves in combat roles, the elite sniper community remained predominantly male, and many questioned whether she could handle the physical and mental demands of such specialized warfare. Maria's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. Born in East Los Angeles to immigrant parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, she had grown up in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong. Her father, a mechanic who had served briefly in the Mexican military, taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, using an old hunting rifle at a makeshift range behind their apartment building. He believed that, in their neighborhood, knowing how to handle a weapon wasn't just useful, it was essential for survival. What her father discovered during those early shooting sessions was that Maria possessed an almost supernatural ability to hit targets at distances that seemed impossible for someone her age and size. She could calculate wind speed and direction instinctively, adjust for bullet drop without conscious thought, and maintain steady breathing even when her heart was racing from adrenaline. By the time she was 16, she was outperforming grown men at local shooting competitions, earning money for her family and catching the attention of military recruiters. The decision to join the Marines came after her older brother was killed in a drive-by shooting that was meant for someone else. Maria realized that her exceptional shooting skills could be used for something greater than local competitions. She wanted to protect people, to make a difference in a world that often seemed chaotic and unfair. The Marines offered her the opportunity to channel her abilities toward serving her country while escaping the cycle of violence that plagued her neighborhood. Boot camp at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego had been brutal, but Maria thrived under the pressure. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands and psychological stress, she found the structure and discipline liberating. The drill instructors quickly recognized her shooting ability, but they also saw something else in her: an uncommon composure under pressure and an analytical mind that could process complex tactical situations rapidly. After completing basic training and advanced marksmanship courses, Maria was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, where she served 2 deployments in Iraq. During her first tour, she worked primarily in standard infantry roles, but her exceptional shooting skills didn't go unnoticed by her commanding officers. On several occasions, she made shots that saved the lives of fellow Marines, including a 400-meter shot that eliminated a sniper who had pinned down her unit for over 2 hours. It was during her second deployment that Maria truly began to understand the psychological complexities of being a sniper. The role required more than just technical shooting skills. It demanded the ability to remain hidden for hours or even days, to make life-and-death decisions in split seconds, and to live with the consequences of those decisions long after the trigger was pulled. She learned to read the subtle signs of enemy movement, to predict human behavior under stress, and to trust her instincts even when they contradicted conventional wisdom. The recommendation for sniper school came from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, who had observed Maria's performance during a particularly intense firefight in Fallujah. Chen noted not only Maria's exceptional marksmanship but also her ability to remain calm and focused while providing covering fire for a medical evacuation under enemy fire. The recommendation letter specifically mentioned Maria's intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors that cannot be taught in any manual. Sniper school at Camp Lejeune proved to be the most challenging experience of Maria's military career. The course was designed to push candidates to their absolute limits, both physically and mentally. Students were required to demonstrate proficiency in long-range marksmanship, fieldcraft, observation techniques, and mission planning. The attrition rate was typically over 60%, and instructors took pride in weeding out candidates who couldn't handle the pressure. During the final weeks of sniper school, Maria faced her greatest challenge yet. The final exercise required students to infiltrate a mock enemy position, remain undetected for 48 hours while gathering intelligence, and then eliminate multiple targets in a coordinated strike. Most students struggled with maintaining concealment for extended periods or failed to account for changing environmental conditions that affected their shots. Maria approached the exercise differently than her classmates. Instead of focusing solely on the shooting aspect, she spent considerable time analyzing the behavioral patterns of the instructors who were playing enemy roles. She noticed that they followed predictable routines, checking certain positions at specific intervals. This observation allowed her to time her movements perfectly and position herself in a location that provided optimal shooting angles while remaining virtually invisible. When the time came to take her shots, Maria demonstrated something that her instructors had rarely seen in their years of training snipers. She didn't just hit her targets. She eliminated them in a sequence that maximized tactical advantage while minimizing the risk of detection. Her first shot neutralized the enemy commander, creating confusion among the remaining role players. Her second shot eliminated the communication specialist, cutting off their ability to coordinate a response. The third shot took out the heavy weapons operator, removing their most significant threat to a potential rescue operation. What impressed the instructors most wasn't just the accuracy of her shots, but the strategic thinking behind the sequence. Maria had demonstrated an understanding of small unit tactics that went beyond traditional sniper training. She thought like a chess player, always considering multiple moves ahead and understanding how each action would affect the overall mission outcome. Upon graduation from sniper school, Maria was assigned to the elite reconnaissance unit that was now preparing for the Afghanistan mission. The unit's reputation was legendary within the Marine Corps. They had successfully completed dozens of high-risk missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the world. Their success rate was nearly 100%, and they had never lost a team member during operational deployment. The current training exercise at Camp Pendleton was designed to simulate the exact conditions they would face in Afghanistan. The targets were positioned at extreme ranges, requiring shots of over 1,000 meters in challenging wind conditions. The mock enemy positions were heavily fortified and provided minimal exposure windows. Most critically, the exercise required coordinated engagement of multiple targets within a compressed time frame, simulating the real-world scenario where any delay could result in mission failure and potential casualties. As Maria watched her teammates struggle with the training scenario, she began to understand why she had been selected for this mission. It wasn't just about her shooting ability, though that was certainly exceptional. It was about her capacity to see patterns and solutions that others missed, to remain calm when others became frustrated, and to adapt her approach based on real-time analysis of changing conditions. The terrorist cell they were targeting had already proven themselves capable of evading multiple attempts at elimination. Previous missions had failed, not because of poor planning or inadequate intelligence, but because the targets were exceptionally skilled at counter-surveillance and had demonstrated an ability to detect and neutralize threats before they could be engaged. The mission planners needed someone who could think differently, who could approach the problem from an unexpected angle. Colonel Morrison approached Maria as the day's training concluded with another series of missed shots. His expression was grim, and she could see the concern in his eyes. The mission was scheduled to commence in less than 2 weeks, and the unit's performance during training exercises was not meeting the standards required for such a high-stakes operation. The conversation that followed would change everything. Morrison explained that intelligence had identified the exact location where the terrorist cell would be meeting in 5 days. It was a narrow window of opportunity that might not come again for months or even years. The meeting would include 3 high-value targets whose elimination could significantly disrupt terrorist operations throughout the region. However, the location presented tactical challenges that had stumped military planners for weeks. The targets would be meeting in a remote mountain compound that provided excellent defensive positions and multiple escape routes. Previous surveillance had revealed that they employed sophisticated counter-sniper measures, including the use of decoys, unpredictable movement patterns, and advanced detection equipment. Any traditional sniper approach would likely be detected before a shot could be taken, resulting in mission failure and potentially compromising future operations. Maria listened carefully as Morrison outlined the tactical situation, asking detailed questions about terrain features, weather patterns, and the target's behavioral patterns. She could see why previous attempts had failed and why her teammates were struggling with the training exercises. They were approaching the problem using conventional sniper tactics, which were predictable and could be countered by a sophisticated enemy. As she walked back to her quarters that evening, Maria's mind was already working on alternative approaches to the mission. She understood that success would require more than just exceptional marksmanship. It would require a complete reimagining of how such a mission could be executed. The solution she was beginning to formulate would challenge every conventional assumption about long-range engagement tactics, and would require her to trust her instincts completely. The next morning brought new challenges and revelations that would test everything Maria had learned about warfare, marksmanship, and her own capabilities. The mission briefing would reveal details that made the assignment even more complex and dangerous than anyone had initially realized. The terrorist cell wasn't just planning future attacks. They were in the final stages of coordinating an assault on a coalition base that housed over 200 American personnel. The stakes had just become impossibly high, and failure was not an option. The briefing room at Camp Pendleton fell silent as the intelligence officer clicked through satellite images that showed the terrorist compound nestled in the Afghan mountains like a fortress carved from stone. Major Rebecca Walsh, the lead intelligence analyst for the operation, had spent months studying this location, and her presentation revealed why previous missions had failed so catastrophically. The compound sat on a narrow ridge approximately 3,200 meters above sea level, surrounded by steep cliffs that made conventional assault nearly impossible. The only approach routes were exposed to observation from multiple defensive positions, and the targets had demonstrated remarkable discipline in their security procedures. They never appeared in the same location twice, never followed predictable schedules, and employed sophisticated electronic countermeasures that could detect most surveillance equipment. Maria studied the aerial photographs with growing fascination. Where others saw an impregnable defensive position, she began to identify patterns and possibilities that hadn't been considered. The compound's greatest strength, its isolated mountain location, might also be its greatest vulnerability if approached from an unexpected direction and distance. Major Walsh continued her briefing, explaining that the 3 targets represented the highest-value terrorist objectives in the region. Ahmad Hassan, the cell leader, was responsible for coordinating attacks that had killed over 40 coalition personnel in the past 6 months. His lieutenant, Khalil Mansour, was an expert in improvised explosive devices whose designs had been copied by terrorist groups throughout the Middle East. The 3rd target, Omar al-Rashid, was a communications specialist who maintained contact with terrorist networks across 3 countries. The intelligence indicated that all 3 men would be present at the compound in 4 days for a critical planning meeting. Electronic intercepts suggested they were finalizing details for a massive attack on Forward Operating Base Chapman, where 200 American soldiers were stationed. The base's defensive positions were strong, but intelligence indicated the terrorists had obtained detailed information about patrol schedules, defensive weak points, and the location of critical facilities. Colonel Morrison took over the briefing to explain why conventional approaches had failed. 2 previous sniper teams had attempted to eliminate these targets using traditional long-range engagement tactics. Both missions had been compromised before shots could be fired, suggesting that the terrorists had developed effective methods for detecting sniper positions at typical engagement ranges. The first team had approached from the north, establishing a hide approximately 800 meters from the compound. They had remained in position for 18 hours before being forced to abort, when enemy patrols began moving directly toward their location. Post-mission analysis suggested that the terrorists had detected the team using seismic sensors that could identify the minute vibrations created by human movement across the rocky terrain. The second team had tried a southern approach, positioning themselves at a range of 1,200 meters in an attempt to avoid detection systems. However, they discovered that at this distance, the compound's elevation provided complete cover for all potential target areas. The terrorists had clearly chosen their location with long-range threats in mind, ensuring that no conventional sniper position could achieve effective sightlines to critical areas. Maria raised her hand during the briefing, asking about weather patterns and atmospheric conditions at the target location. Major Walsh explained that the mountain region was subject to extreme weather variability, with wind speeds that could exceed 60 kilometers per hour, and temperature fluctuations that dramatically affected ballistic calculations. Previous teams had struggled with these conditions, finding that their shots were consistently affected by unpredictable air currents and thermal layers created by the dramatic elevation changes. As the briefing concluded, Maria remained in her seat, continuing to study the satellite images while her teammates filed out of the room. She was beginning to formulate an approach that challenged every assumption about how this mission should be executed. Her idea was so unconventional that she wasn't sure anyone would approve it. But the more she studied the tactical situation, the more convinced she became that traditional methods would continue to fail. Colonel Morrison noticed her concentration and approached her after the room had emptied. He could see that she was working through something significant, and her reputation for unconventional thinking had already earned his respect during previous training exercises. Maria outlined her preliminary thoughts, explaining that she believed the key to mission success lay in completely abandoning conventional engagement ranges and tactics. Instead of trying to get closer to the compound or find better hiding positions, she proposed positioning herself at an extreme range where detection systems would be ineffective and where the targets would have no reason to expect a threat. The range she was considering was unprecedented for this type of mission, over 2,500 meters. At this distance, she would be completely beyond the reach of the compound's detection systems and defensive measures. However, the shot would require compensating for extreme environmental factors and would push the limits of both her equipment and skills. Morrison initially dismissed the idea as impossible. At 2,500 meters, wind drift alone could move a bullet several meters off target, and the time of flight would be sufficient for targets to move out of the shooting solution, even if her initial calculations were perfect. The shot would require predicting not just current environmental conditions, but how those conditions would change during the bullet's flight time. Maria presented her analysis of why conventional approaches had failed, explaining that the terrorists' defensive strategy was specifically designed to counter threats at typical engagement ranges. They had positioned motion sensors, thermal detection equipment, and observation posts to create overlapping coverage of all areas where traditional sniper positions might be established. However, their defensive planning appeared to assume that threats would come from distances under 1,500 meters. She had studied the compound's defensive layout extensively and noticed that observation posts were oriented toward closer approach routes. The thermal detection equipment had limited range, and the motion sensors appeared to be positioned to cover areas within a specific radius of the compound. If she could position herself beyond these defensive measures, she would essentially be invisible to their security systems. The mathematical challenges were staggering. At 2,500 meters, she would need to calculate bullet drop of approximately 35 meters, account for wind drift that could exceed 10 meters in any direction, and compensate for atmospheric pressure changes caused by the extreme elevation. Additionally, she would need to predict the movement patterns of targets who appeared randomly and unpredictably throughout the compound. Morrison asked her to present a detailed tactical plan within 24 hours. He was skeptical but recognized that conventional approaches had failed repeatedly, and the mission timeline left no room for further delays. If Maria could develop a feasible plan for engaging targets at extreme range, it might represent their only chance for mission success. Maria spent the next 18 hours working through ballistic calculations, studying weather data from the target region and analyzing every available piece of intelligence about the target's behavioral patterns. She requisitioned specialized ballistic software and consulted with experts in long-range shooting who had experience with extreme distance engagements. The more she studied the problem, the more convinced she became that success was possible. The key was understanding that at extreme range, many of the factors that complicated shorter shots actually became more predictable. Wind patterns at high altitude followed more consistent patterns than ground-level air currents. The target's movements, while apparently random at close observation, showed subtle patterns when analyzed over extended periods. She discovered that Ahmad Hassan, the primary target, had a habit of checking specific observation points at roughly 30-minute intervals during daylight hours. His route was predictable enough that she could anticipate his location within a narrow window of time. Khalil Mansour typically remained near the compound's communications equipment, which was located in an elevated position that would be visible from her proposed shooting position. Omar al-Rashid was the most unpredictable, but intelligence suggested he spent considerable time at an outdoor meeting area during morning hours. The tactical plan she developed was unlike anything attempted in modern military history. She would approach the shooting position under cover of darkness, moving through terrain that was considered impassable by conventional standards. The position she had identified was on a ridge that required technical climbing skills to reach, but it offered a clear line of sight to the compound while remaining completely beyond the range of detection systems. Her equipment requirements were equally unconventional. She requested a specialized rifle system designed for extreme long-range shooting, along with advanced ballistic computers and environmental monitoring equipment. Most importantly, she needed weather data that was updated in real time, as atmospheric conditions could change rapidly in the mountain environment. The shooting sequence she planned would require eliminating all 3 targets within a compressed time frame. Once the first shot was fired, the remaining targets would likely take cover, making follow-up shots significantly more difficult. She calculated that she would have approximately 90 seconds to engage all 3 targets before they could retreat to protected areas within the compound. When Maria presented her plan to Colonel Morrison and the mission planning team, the room fell silent. The audacity of attempting shots at 2,500 meters was unprecedented, and many of the officers questioned whether it was even technically possible with current equipment and environmental conditions. Major Walsh raised concerns about the reliability of intelligence regarding target movements. At extreme range, any error in predicting target location would result in mission failure, and the intelligence picture was based on limited observation data gathered from previous surveillance operations. The weapons specialist questioned whether any rifle system could deliver consistent accuracy at such extreme range, particularly given the environmental challenges presented by the mountain location. Even with perfect shooting technique, mechanical limitations of the equipment might make successful engagement impossible. Despite these concerns, Morrison recognized that conventional approaches had failed repeatedly and that time was running out. Intelligence indicated that the terrorist attack on Forward Operating Base Chapman was scheduled to commence within days of the planned meeting. If this mission failed, 200 American personnel would be at extreme risk, and the opportunity to eliminate these high-value targets might not arise again for months. The decision was made to proceed with Maria's plan, but with significant modifications to address the concerns raised during the planning session. Additional intelligence assets would be deployed to provide real-time updates on target movements and weather conditions. Backup plans would be developed in case the extreme-range approach failed, though everyone understood that the backup options had already proven unsuccessful. Maria was given 3 days to prepare for the mission, including intensive practice sessions designed to simulate the exact conditions she would face in Afghanistan. The training would push her skills to their absolute limits and would determine whether her unconventional approach had any realistic chance of success. As she prepared for the final training sessions, Maria understood that she was attempting something that challenged the fundamental assumptions about what was possible in modern warfare. Success would require not just exceptional marksmanship, but the ability to think and perform beyond conventional limitations. Failure would mean that 200 American lives remained at risk, and the most dangerous terrorist cell in the region would continue operating with impunity. The next phase of her preparation would test everything she had learned about shooting, tactics, and her own capabilities under extreme pressure. The specialized training facility in the mountains of Colorado had been chosen specifically to simulate the environmental conditions Maria would face in Afghanistan. At an elevation of 3,000 meters, the thin air and extreme temperature variations provided the closest approximation possible to the actual mission environment. The facility had been used to train elite military units for high-altitude operations, but never for the type of extreme-range shooting that Maria was attempting. Maria arrived at the facility with a team of specialists who would support her final preparation phase. Master Gunnery Sergeant Robert Chen, the Marine Corps' leading expert in long-range ballistics, had volunteered to serve as her spotter and coach during the training period. Chen had over 20 years of experience in precision shooting and had worked with some of the most elite marksmen in the military. But even he was skeptical about the feasibility of reliable hits at 2,500 meters under combat conditions. The rifle system selected for the mission was a highly modified version of the Barrett M82A1, customized specifically for extreme long-range engagement. The weapon had been fitted with a specialized barrel, designed to minimize bullet deformation during the extended flight time, and the scope system incorporated advanced ballistic computers that could calculate real-time corrections for environmental factors. The ammunition was match-grade rounds that had been individually inspected and selected for consistent ballistic performance. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a ballistics expert from the Army Research Laboratory, had joined the team to help develop the mathematical models that would be essential for success at extreme range. She explained that at 2,500 meters, the bullet would be in flight for approximately 4 seconds, during which time it would drop nearly 35 meters and could drift more than 10 meters in any direction depending on wind conditions. The calculations required to compensate for these factors were beyond what any human could perform in real time, necessitating the use of advanced computer systems. The first day of training focused on establishing baseline accuracy with the specialized equipment under controlled conditions. Even with perfect weather and no time pressure, Maria found that achieving consistent accuracy at extreme range required recalibrating everything she had learned about shooting. The normal visual references she relied on for range estimation and wind reading were virtually useless at such distances, forcing her to depend entirely on electronic systems and mathematical calculations. Chen worked with her to develop new techniques for reading environmental conditions at extreme range. Traditional methods of observing vegetation movement or dust patterns were inadequate for distances over 2,000 meters. Instead, they used weather monitoring equipment to measure wind speed and direction at multiple elevations, creating a three-dimensional map of air currents that could affect bullet trajectory. The complexity of the calculations was staggering. Dr. Lapro, Mitchell's computer models had to account for the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth, which becomes significant at extreme ranges. At 2,500 meters, the Earth's rotation would cause the bullet to drift approximately 15 centimeters to the right, a factor that had never been relevant in Maria's previous shooting experience. Additionally, the dramatic elevation changes between her shooting position and the target created thermal layers that could deflect the bullet in unpredictable ways. During the second day of training, Maria attempted her first shots at the full 2,500-meter distance. The results were humbling. Despite perfect weather conditions and unlimited time to calculate her shooting solution, her first 10 shots missed the target completely. The bullets were impacting in a pattern that seemed random, suggesting that she was failing to account for critical environmental factors. Chen analyzed each miss carefully, using high-speed cameras and acoustic sensors to track the bullet's flight path. He discovered that Maria was unconsciously applying shooting techniques that were optimized for shorter ranges, but became counterproductive at extreme distances. Her breathing pattern, trigger control, and follow-through all needed to be modified to account for the extended time requirements of extreme-range shooting. The psychological challenges were as significant as the technical ones. At shorter ranges, a shooter receives immediate feedback about shot placement, allowing for rapid adjustments. At 2,500 meters, the time delay between firing and impact made it difficult to correlate technique adjustments with results. Maria found herself second-guessing every aspect of her shooting process, leading to inconsistent performance. Mitchell worked with Maria to develop a systematic approach to shot execution that reduced the psychological pressure and created consistent, repeatable processes. Instead of trying to perfect each individual shot, Maria learned to focus on executing identical procedures for every shot, trusting the ballistic computers to handle the complex environmental calculations. By the third day, Maria was beginning to achieve consistent hits on stationary targets at extreme range. However, the mission would require engaging moving targets within compressed timeframes, adding layers of complexity that pushed the limits of what was technically possible. The ballistic computers could predict where a stationary target would be when the bullet arrived, but calculating the intersection point for a moving target required predicting human behavior with mathematical precision. Chen introduced dynamic targeting exercises that simulated the type of shots Maria would face during the actual mission. Remote-controlled targets moved through the shooting area following patterns based on intelligence about the terrorists' behavioral routines. Maria needed to predict not only where the target would be when her bullet arrived, but also account for the possibility that the target might change direction or speed during the bullet's flight time. The stress of these exercises began to reveal the true difficulty of what Maria was attempting. Even when she correctly calculated the environmental factors and predicted target movement, small variations in her shooting technique could result in misses. The margin for error at extreme range was measured in centimeters, and any deviation from perfect execution would result in mission failure. Captain David Rodriguez, a military psychologist specializing in performance under extreme stress, joined the training team to help Maria develop mental techniques for maintaining focus during the actual mission. He explained that the psychological pressure of knowing that 200 American lives depended on her performance could cause performance degradation even in highly trained individuals. Rodriguez worked with Maria to develop visualization techniques that allowed her to mentally rehearse the entire shooting sequence under various scenarios. She practiced maintaining concentration despite simulated distractions, including radio communications, time pressure, and equipment malfunctions. The goal was to develop automatic responses that would function correctly even under extreme stress. The final training exercise was designed to simulate the exact conditions Maria would face during the mission. She was required to approach the shooting position during darkness, carrying full combat equipment while navigating difficult terrain. Once in position, she had to wait for several hours while monitoring simulated target movements, then execute the shooting sequence within a 90-second window. The exercise revealed additional challenges that hadn't been apparent during static training sessions. After lying motionless in a concealed position for hours, Maria's fine motor control was affected by muscle stiffness and circulatory restrictions. The cold mountain air made precise trigger control more difficult, and the physical discomfort of maintaining a shooting position for extended periods affected her concentration. Chen modified the training protocol to include extended observation periods and techniques for maintaining physical readiness during long waits. Maria learned to use micro-movements and isometric exercises to maintain circulation and muscle function while remaining concealed. She also practiced rapid transitions from observation mode to shooting readiness, ensuring she could execute the shooting sequence even after hours of motionless waiting. The psychological pressure of the final exercise was intense. Unlike previous training where missed shots were simply learning opportunities, this exercise was designed to simulate the irreversible nature of the actual mission. Maria understood that during the real operation she would have only one opportunity to engage each target, and any miss would likely result in the targets taking cover and mission failure. Despite the pressure, Maria's performance during the final exercise exceeded all expectations. She successfully engaged 3 moving targets within the required time frame, achieving hits that would have been immediately incapacitating in a combat scenario. More importantly, she demonstrated the ability to maintain composure and execute proper technique even under extreme psychological pressure. Colonel Morrison observed the final exercise and was impressed by Maria's performance, but he remained concerned about factors that couldn't be replicated in training. The actual mission would involve additional variables, including potential enemy detection, equipment failures, and intelligence inaccuracies that could compromise the operation even if the shooting execution was perfect. The mission briefing team had continued refining intelligence about the target location and the terrorists' behavioral patterns. Updated satellite imagery showed that the compound's defensive positions had been reinforced, suggesting that the terrorists were aware of potential threats and were taking additional security measures. This development made Maria's extreme-range approach even more critical, as closer engagement distances would likely result in immediate detection. Weather forecasts for the mission area indicated challenging conditions including high winds and potential precipitation. The mountain region was known for rapid weather changes that could make extreme-range shooting impossible, even for highly trained marksmen. Mission planners developed multiple contingency timelines to account for weather delays, but the intelligence window for finding all 3 targets together was limited. Equipment preparations were equally critical. The specialized rifle system required extensive calibration for the specific environmental conditions at the target location. Ballistic computers needed to be programmed with current atmospheric data, and backup systems were prepared in case primary equipment failed during the mission. Every component of Maria's equipment was tested multiple times to ensure reliability under extreme conditions. The insertion plan called for Maria to be transported by helicopter to within 10 kilometers of her shooting position, then approach on foot during darkness. The route had been carefully planned to avoid enemy observation posts and natural obstacles, but it required several hours of movement through difficult terrain while carrying heavy equipment. Physical conditioning had been a constant focus throughout her training, as equipment failure due to fatigue could compromise the entire mission. Intelligence updates continued to arrive as the mission date approached. Electronic intercepts confirmed that the terrorist meeting was scheduled to proceed as planned, and all 3 high-value targets were confirmed to be traveling toward the compound. However, the intercepts also suggested that the terrorists were aware of increased coalition activity in the region and had implemented enhanced security measures. The final mission briefing took place 12 hours before insertion. Maria reviewed every aspect of the operational plan, including primary and backup shooting positions, target identification procedures, and extraction protocols. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but her training had prepared her for exactly this type of pressure. As Maria prepared her equipment for the mission, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From shooting behind her family's apartment in Los Angeles to preparing for the most challenging sniper mission in modern military history, every experience had contributed to her readiness for this operation. The helicopter that would carry her to the insertion point was already being prepared, and weather reports indicated that conditions at the target location were within acceptable parameters for the extreme-range shooting she would attempt. In less than 24 hours, she would either achieve something unprecedented in military history or face the consequences of failure that could cost hundreds of American lives. The mission was about to begin, and everything Maria had trained for would be tested under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The helicopter blades chopped through the thin mountain air as Maria checked her equipment one final time. The specialized rifle case was secured beside her, containing the weapon system that would either make military history or serve as a reminder of the limitations of human capability. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chen sat across from her, monitoring real-time weather data from the target area on his tablet computer. The wind patterns were holding steady within acceptable parameters, but mountain weather could change in minutes. Captain Lisa Park, the mission commander, reviewed the latest intelligence updates through her headset. Electronic surveillance had confirmed that all 3 targets were present at the compound and following their expected behavioral patterns. Ahmad Hassan had been observed checking perimeter positions at regular intervals. Khalil Mansour was working near the communications equipment, and Omar al-Rashid was spending time at the outdoor meeting area. The window of opportunity was narrow but viable. The helicopter began its descent toward the insertion point 10 kilometers from Maria's planned shooting position. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, had extensive experience with high-altitude operations in Afghanistan and had successfully inserted special operations teams in similar terrain. However, even he was impressed by the audacity of what Maria was attempting to accomplish. As they approached the landing zone, Maria could see the target compound in the distance, barely visible as a cluster of lights against the dark mountainside. The distance appeared impossibly vast, and she felt a momentary wave of doubt about whether her plan could actually work. At this range, the targets would be invisible to the naked eye, and she would be relying entirely on her scope and ballistic computers to guide her shots. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided concealment from observation. Maria and Chen quickly unloaded their equipment and moved away from the aircraft, as Torres immediately lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. They were now alone in enemy territory, with no support available until the mission was completed. The approach to Maria's shooting position required 3 hours of careful movement through terrain that challenged every aspect of her physical conditioning. The route had been planned to avoid known enemy positions, but the mountainous environment presented natural obstacles that were nearly as dangerous as hostile forces. Loose rock, steep slopes, and thin air at high altitude made progress slow and exhausting. Chen carried the ballistic computer equipment and weather monitoring systems, while Maria transported the rifle case and ammunition. They moved in complete silence, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous path. Every step had to be carefully planned to avoid creating noise that could alert enemy patrols or dislodging rocks that might reveal their location. 2 hours into the approach, they encountered their first major obstacle. Intelligence had indicated that a particular ravine was passable, but recent rock slides had blocked the planned route. Chen identified an alternative path that was steeper and more exposed, but would still allow them to reach the shooting position. The detour added 30 minutes to their timeline, reducing the window available for mission execution. As they climbed toward the shooting position, Maria began to feel the psychological weight of what she was attempting. Every other Marine sniper mission in history had involved engagement ranges that were considered normal, or at least achievable with conventional techniques. She was venturing into territory that existed more in theoretical discussions than actual combat operations. The shooting position Maria had selected was on a rocky ledge that provided an unobstructed view of the target compound, while remaining concealed from enemy observation. The position required technical climbing skills to reach, and the working space was barely large enough for one person to operate effectively. Chen would be positioned several meters away with the supporting equipment, connected by radio but unable to provide direct physical assistance. Setting up the shooting position took over an hour. The rifle system needed to be perfectly stable and aligned, requiring careful placement of bipods and support equipment on the uneven rocky surface. The ballistic computer required precise input about the shooting position's exact location, elevation, and orientation relative to the target. Every measurement had to be perfect, as even small errors would be magnified over the extreme range. Chen established the weather monitoring station and began collecting data about atmospheric conditions between the shooting position and the target. Wind speed and direction varied significantly at different elevations, creating a complex three-dimensional map of air currents that could affect bullet trajectory. The ballistic computer processed this information continuously, updating trajectory calculations as conditions changed. As dawn began to break over the mountains, Maria could see the target compound clearly through her scope for the first time. The buildings appeared impossibly small and distant, even with maximum magnification. She could identify the general areas where intelligence suggested the targets would appear, but distinguishing individual people would require perfect timing and optimal atmospheric conditions. The waiting period began. Intelligence indicated that the targets typically became active during morning hours, but their exact schedules were unpredictable. Maria had to remain in shooting position, ready to engage immediately when opportunities presented themselves. The physical demands of maintaining a steady shooting position for hours were enormous, requiring constant attention to muscle tension and breathing patterns. Chen monitored radio communications and provided updates about atmospheric conditions. The weather was holding steady within acceptable parameters, but thermal layers created by the rising sun were beginning to affect visibility and ballistic calculations. The ballistic computer continuously updated trajectory predictions as conditions changed, but Maria would need to make final adjustments based on real-time observations. At 0847 hours, Chen spotted the first target through his observation equipment. Ahmad Hassan had emerged from the main building and was walking toward one of the perimeter observation posts. His movement pattern matched intelligence predictions, and the ballistic computer calculated that he would be in an optimal shooting position in approximately 90 seconds. Maria adjusted her scope and verified the ballistic solution displayed on her computer screen. The calculations showed that she needed to aim 34.7 meters above the target and 8.3 meters to the left to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift. The precision required was staggering, and she had to trust mathematics rather than instinct for shot placement. The crosshairs settled on a point that appeared to be empty air high above and to the side of the target. Every aspect of Maria's training emphasized the importance of aiming directly at the target, and overriding these instincts to aim at an apparently random point in space required tremendous mental discipline. The ballistic computer confirmed that Hassan was moving into the predicted position. Maria controlled her breathing and began the trigger sequence she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle fired, and the bullet began its 4-second journey through the thin mountain air. At this extreme range, she could actually track the bullet's vapor trail through her scope, watching as it followed the trajectory predicted by the ballistic computer. The bullet struck Hassan's center mass, and he dropped immediately. The shot had been perfect, validating months of preparation and mathematical modeling. However, Maria had no time to appreciate her success. Intelligence indicated that the remaining targets would likely take cover within minutes of the first shot, giving her a rapidly closing window to complete the mission. Chen was already tracking the second target through his observation equipment. Khalil Mansour had emerged from the communications building, apparently investigating the commotion caused by Hassan's sudden collapse. His position was more challenging because he was partially concealed by equipment and moving unpredictably as he tried to understand what had happened. The ballistic computer provided updated calculations for the second shot, accounting for slight changes in atmospheric conditions and the target's different elevation within the compound. Maria adjusted her aim point and waited for Mansour to move into a position where she could achieve a clear shot. Mansour paused next to a radio antenna, presenting a brief opportunity for engagement. Maria fired her second shot, again aiming at a point that appeared to be nowhere near the target. This bullet's trajectory was slightly different due to atmospheric changes, but the ballistic computer had accurately predicted the required adjustments. Mansour fell backward, eliminated by a shot he never saw coming. The third target, Omar al-Rashid, had taken cover inside a building after witnessing the deaths of his companions. Maria could see movement through windows, but the angles and obstructions made a clear shot impossible. Chen reported that al-Rashid appeared to be preparing to evacuate the compound, potentially escaping before another shot opportunity presented itself. Minutes passed as Maria maintained her shooting position, watching for any chance to engage the final target. The psychological pressure was intense, knowing that partial mission success might not be sufficient to prevent the planned attack on forward operating base Chapman. Al-Rashid possessed critical knowledge about the operation and could potentially coordinate the attack even without his companions. At 0911 hours, Al-Rashid made a critical error. Believing that the threat came from much closer range, he attempted to escape through what he thought was a concealed exit on the far side of the compound. His route took him across an open area that was visible from Maria's position, providing a brief window for engagement. The shot angle was different from the previous two, requiring new ballistic calculations for the changed geometry. The ballistic computer processed the environmental data and target movement, providing updated aim point coordinates. Al-Rashid was moving quickly, and Maria would have only one opportunity to engage him before he reached cover. Maria tracked the target's movement and predicted his position when the bullet would arrive. The lead calculation was critical, as she needed to fire at a point where Al-Rashid would be, rather than where he was currently located. The ballistic computer provided guidance, but the final shot execution required combining mathematical precision with intuitive understanding of human movement patterns. The third shot was fired with perfect timing. Al-Rashid was moving at a steady pace when the bullet struck him, completing the elimination of all three high-value targets. The entire engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes, but those minutes represented the culmination of months of preparation and training. Chen confirmed that all targets had been eliminated and began preparing for extraction. The successful completion of the mission at such extreme range would likely prompt enemy forces to search for the shooting position, making rapid departure essential. They had planned for this contingency and had identified multiple escape routes that would allow them to reach the extraction point safely. As they prepared to leave the shooting position, Maria reflected on what she had accomplished. The 3 shots she had fired would likely prevent a major terrorist attack and save the lives of 200 American soldiers. More significantly, she had demonstrated that extreme-range precision engagement was possible under combat conditions, potentially changing how military planners approached similar missions in the future. The extraction proceeded without incident, and Maria and Chen reached the pickup point where the helicopter was waiting. As they flew back to base, Chen reviewed the mission data and confirmed that all 3 shots had been hits at ranges that established new records for combat sniper engagements. The ballistic computer had recorded precise measurements of each shot, providing valuable data for future operations. Colonel Morrison was waiting when they returned to base, along with intelligence analysts who needed immediate confirmation of mission success. Satellite imagery had already confirmed that the terrorist compound was inactive, and electronic intercepts suggested that the planned attack on forward operating base Chapman had been abandoned following the elimination of the key planners. The mission debrief revealed the full significance of what Maria had accomplished. Not only had she successfully eliminated 3 high-value targets under extreme conditions, But she had done so using techniques that challenged fundamental assumptions about the limitations of sniper operations. Her achievement would influence military tactics and training for years to come. In the weeks following the mission, Maria received recognition from the highest levels of military command. However, she understood that her greatest accomplishment was not the awards or recognition, but the knowledge that her skills had been used to protect fellow service members and prevent a terrorist attack that could have had devastating consequences. The techniques and equipment developed for Maria's extreme-range mission became the foundation for new approaches to precision engagement in challenging environments. Her success demonstrated that with proper preparation, advanced technology, and exceptional skill, seemingly impossible shots could become achievable even under combat conditions. Maria continued her service with the knowledge that she had pushed the boundaries of what was possible in her profession. The 3 shots she fired in the mountains of Afghanistan represented not just tactical success, but proof that human capability, when combined with advanced technology and thorough preparation, could overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable. The mission had succeeded where all previous attempts had failed, establishing Maria as one of the most accomplished snipers in military history, and proving that sometimes the most unconventional approaches yield the most extraordinary results.